The moment I saw his car still in the parking garage at 9:47 on a Thursday night, I told myself it was the Henderson account. That's what I told myself. My husband worked late sometimes. Architects did. The Henderson mixed-use development had been bleeding his weekends for 3 months, and I'd learned to stop asking what time he'd be home. I'd made chicken piccata, his favorite. I had it boxed up in the passenger seat, still warm, along with a bottle of the Sonoma Chardonnay we'd opened on our 5th anniversary. The occasion was real. His firm had just landed a contract worth more than anything they'd touched before. Regional news had even picked it up. Larson and Holt wins bid for downtown Riverfront Plaza. My husband's name was in the 4th paragraph. I'd screenshot it and sent it to his mother. So I was proud. I was walking into that building proud, carrying food I'd made from scratch, wearing the green dress he always said matched my eyes, and I was smiling at the security guard in the lobby like a woman who had absolutely nothing to worry about. His office was on the 7th floor. The elevator opened onto a quiet hallway. Most of the lights on motion sensors after 8, so only every third panel was lit. I knew the layout by heart. I brought him lunch here a dozen times, met the receptionist, knew which door stuck. I walked past the empty bullpen, past the model of the Riverside Plaza on its pedestal by the window, past the row of framed project photos that my husband always stopped in front of when he was nervous about something new. The light was on under his door. I almost knocked. I don't know why I didn't. Some small animal part of me that had been paying attention longer than my conscious mind had, maybe? I just pushed it open. His name is Gideon, and the woman who had her hands in his hair, pressed against his drafting table, was not a client. She was his managing partner. She'd given a toast at our wedding. I had her cell number in my phone under Renata. Gideon's work. The box of chicken piccata hit the floor. I don't remember letting go of it. Renata saw me first. Her eyes went wide, then, and I will never forget this for as long as I live, she smoothed her blazer, like I was an inconvenience, like I was a delayed conference call. Gideon turned around. His face did something complicated that I didn't have the vocabulary for yet. He said my name. Just my name, Meredith. I don't know what I said back. I know I turned around. I know I walked to the elevator. I know I stood in the parking garage for 4 minutes because I could see the timestamp later on my phone when I tried to understand why I had 3 missed calls from my sister that I never answered. I drove home. I sat in our driveway for a long time. The porch light was on a timer and it clicked off at 10, and I sat in the dark. We had been married for 11 years. We had a mortgage on a 4-bedroom colonial in Westfield, New Jersey. We had a joint checking account, a joint savings account, 2 car payments, and a golden retriever named Biscuit who slept at the foot of our bed and was currently, in that moment, waiting on the other side of the front door. I had been a freelance interior designer when we met. I still was. In the years since, I'd built something real, a client base that was mostly residential with some commercial sprinkled in, a reputation in the area that had taken a decade to earn. I made good money, not Gideon's money, but good. I paid my half. I always had. He made more, and somewhere along the way, without my quite noticing when, that had become a story he told himself about the weight he carried, how hard he worked, what he sacrificed. I thought it was just the stress of the Henderson job. I thought it would pass. I went inside. I fed Biscuit. I sat at the kitchen island and I stared at the pendant light above it, a piece I'd found at an estate sale in Montclair, and rewired myself. And I thought, I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with. That was the thing about being a woman who made her living noticing the details of how people actually lived, the shoes by the door, the books on the nightstand, the mail on the counter. I was not good at being sentimental when clarity was available. I opened my laptop. I pulled up our joint accounts. The savings account had $4,200 in it. It should have had closer to $31,000. I sat very still. I opened the transaction history. Over 14 months, there had been 23 transfers, mostly in the range of $800 to $1,400 to $1,400. One for $2,100 in February. all transferred to an account I didn't recognize, all on weekdays during business hours when I would have been at a client site or in a showroom and not looking at my phone. 23 transfers, 14 months. I thought about the trip he said fell through, the firm retreat in Charleston that got canceled, the weekend conference in Chicago he attended alone because I had a staging scheduled and couldn't come. I thought about every time I'd suggested we redo the master bath, and he'd said, let's wait until after the Henderson project closes. We'll have more breathing room. I closed the laptop. I went upstairs. I made the bed, not because it needed making, just because I needed to do something with my hands. I lay down on top of the covers, still in my green dress, and I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about what I was going to do. He didn't come home that night. He texted at 11:24. Working late, don't wait up. The same message he'd sent me probably 100 times over the course of our marriage, and I lay there reading it and thinking about how a sentence can mean completely different things depending on what you know when you read it. I didn't respond. I put my phone face down and I stared at the ceiling some more. In the morning, I called my friend Margot. Margot was a family law attorney in Summit. We'd known each other since our daughters were in the same second grade class. We'd been assigned to the same volunteer slot for the school book fair and spent 4 hours talking in between, selling paperbacks to 8-year-olds, and that had been that. She was the kind of person who told you the truth in a way that felt like being handed something useful rather than something sharp. I told her what I'd seen. I told her about the account. I could hear her writing things down. She said, "Can you be here at noon?" I said yes. I showered. I dressed carefully, not in the green dress. I wore the charcoal wrap that I bought for a client presentation, the one that made me look like someone who had a plan. I dropped Biscuit at my neighbor's because I didn't know how long I'd be, and I drove to Summit. Margot's office was in a converted Victorian on Maple Street. She'd renovated it herself. I know because she'd hired me to consult on the back addition, and there were plants in every window, and a receptionist named Therese Hope wrote me coffee without asking how I took it, because she'd seen me there enough times to know. Margot came out to get me herself. She was wearing reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and she squeezed my hand and didn't say anything about how I looked, which was the right call. We sat down. She opened a yellow legal pad. "Before we start," she said, "I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you is not me predicting what will happen. It's me showing you what your options are. You don't have to decide anything today." "I know," I said. "I just need to know what I have." We talked for 2.5 hours. She walked me through the marital asset picture, explained what equitable distribution looked like in New Jersey, asked me detailed questions about the transfers, when they started, how much, whether I had any documentation. I'd forwarded myself screenshots before I left the house. She looked at them and made a sound I couldn't quite interpret and wrote something down. "This is going to take a little time to untangle," she said. "I want to bring in a forensic accountant, someone I've worked with before who's very good. But Meredith," she took her glasses off, "I want to be honest with you. Based on what you've shown me, you're in a stronger position than you might think." I drove home feeling something I didn't have a name for. Not better, not worse, something more like oriented. Gideon came home that evening. He walked in with the careful energy of someone who had been rehearsing in the car. He set his bag down. He looked at me with an expression that was trying to be open and apologetic and was landing somewhere closer to strategic. "We need to talk," he said. "I know," I said. I was making tea. I kept making tea. I didn't look at him. "Last night," he started. "Not tonight," I said. "Meredith, I'm not doing this tonight, Gideon." I turned around and I looked at him directly, and I made sure my voice was steady. "I need you to sleep in the guest room for a few days." "Can you do that?" He blinked. He'd expected crying. He'd expected volume. I could see him recalibrating. "I just want to explain. And I'll listen. I will. Just not tonight." He slept in the guest room. I lay awake in our room with Biscuit, and I listened to the house settle, and I thought about the $26,800 that had left our savings account over 14 months, and I thought about the fact that Gideon had not, apparently, used the credit card I'd suspended that morning, which told me either he hadn't tried yet or he had another card I didn't know about. Both possibilities were useful information. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. Gideon went to work. I went to work. We passed each other in the kitchen with the politeness of people who'd been instructed by lawyers not to fight. He tried twice more to have the conversation. I deflected both times. I was not ready, and more importantly, I was not done. Margot's forensic accountant, a compact, precise woman named Dr. Asha Holbrook, who smelled like cedar and spoke in complete paragraphs, found the secondary account within 4 days. It was a checking account opened 18 months ago, joint between Gideon and Renata, at a different bank than any we used. The transfers from our savings were going there. The statements Dr. Holbrook pulled showed regular charges, a furnished short-term rental in Hoboken, dinners, a weekend in the Berkshires in October that Gideon had told me was a site visit for a project in Pittsfield. There was also a credit card I hadn't known about. The balance was $11,400. Most of it was hers, Renata's, charged to an account that listed Gideon as a joint holder. He had been helping to pay for things in her life that I was also helping to pay for, without knowing I was paying for them at all. Dr. Holbrook laid everything out in a binder, color-coded, tabbed. She slid it across the table to me and said, "I've done a lot of these." This one was not hard to follow. I thanked her. I took the binder home. I set it on the kitchen island where the chicken piccata had sat 11 days ago, and I poured myself 2 fingers of the good bourbon, the bottle we'd been saving for Gideon's next big milestone, and I sat with it. I had what I needed. What I did next, I did carefully. I moved the contents of our joint savings to a new individual account, what remained of it. The $4,200 plus 2 months of my own income I'd been depositing elsewhere since the night I'd sat in our dark driveway. I was not taking what wasn't mine. Margot had been explicit about what I was entitled to, and I stayed within those lines. I had a contractor come and rekey all the locks while Gideon was at a site walk in Jersey City. I didn't change the guest room key. I was not trying to be cruel. I was trying to be finished. I told Gideon's mother before I told Gideon. I know some people would consider that wrong. She and I had been close for 11 years. She called me on my birthday before she called him. That was just true. And I felt she deserved to hear it from me, rather than learn about it sideways at some family dinner 6 months later, when everything had already fallen apart. She was quiet on the phone for a long time. Then she said, "I'm so sorry, Meredith. I want you to know that, whatever happens, you are not losing this family." I thanked her and cried for the first time since the parking garage. There was, at Gideon's firm, an annual project showcase. They held it every November at a restored warehouse event space in Newark. Clients, city officials, local press, the whole architecture and design community in a 20-mile radius. My husband had presented at it twice. I had attended every year we'd been together, standing in the crowd in some version of a cocktail dress, proud, pointing at his renderings on the display walls and saying my husband did that. This year's showcase was on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the night in the parking garage. Gideon had mentioned it twice in passing. Once to say he was presenting on the Riverside Plaza project, once to check whether I was coming. Both times I'd said I wasn't sure. I was sure. I called ahead and confirmed with the events coordinator, a woman I'd actually worked with once on a staging, so the conversation was warm and easy, that the venue would have a small hallway alcove off the main gallery just past the coat check. She said yes. I thanked her and asked one more question, and she answered it, and then I called Margot. Margot said she'd be there. I wore the midnight blue dress. Structured shoulders, clean line, nothing dramatic. I did my hair the way I wear it when I want to feel like myself. I drove to Newark, handed my coat to the woman at the coat check, accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray, and I walked into the room. Gideon was by the Riverside Plaza display with 3 people in suits who looked like city planners. He had the particular brightness in his face that he got when he was being admired. Renata was across the room near the bar, in a dove-gray sheath dress, talking to someone from the city council. She had the ease of a woman who'd done this many times and felt at home in every room she entered. I looked at both of them. I felt, and this surprised me, standing there with my sparkling water in a room full of people who knew my face as Gideon's wife. I felt nothing that looked like heartbreak anymore. What I felt was the very particular clarity of a decision already made. I had 2 hours. Margot arrived at 7:15 with her associate, a young man I'd met once before named James. They came in through the side entrance. I met them by the coat check. Margot was wearing her courtroom blazer, the charcoal with the hidden pockets, and she handed me a long, calm look that meant whenever you're ready. I was ready. We waited until Gideon began his presentation. He was at the podium in front of the Riverside Plaza display, speaking into the microphone, 50 or 60 people arranged in a loose semicircle in front of him. He'd given this talk before. He was comfortable. He was good at it. James walked through the edge of the crowd. He was professional about it. No theatrics, no raised voice, just the clean delivery of an envelope into a man's hand during a pause between sentences. Gideon looked down. He looked up. He looked at James. He looked at the envelope. The room didn't understand what it was watching yet. Renata, still near the bar, understood slightly faster. I was watching her face when she saw Margot's associate cross the room, and her expression shifted in a way that her professional training almost concealed. I had already turned and was walking toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Gideon say my name, not into the microphone, just out loud, into the room. I didn't stop. I handed my ticket to the coat check attendant, accepted my coat, thanked her, and walked through the door into the November night. It was cold, the kind of cold that sharpens everything. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked up at the amber glow of the streetlights against the clouds, and I thought about the woman who had made chicken piccata 3 weeks ago and driven 40 minutes to deliver it to a man who did not deserve it. Margot came out a few minutes later. She stood beside me, both of us looking out at the street. "You okay?" she said. "I think so," I said. She nodded. She pulled her coat closed and didn't say anything else, because there wasn't anything else to say, and that was one of the things I loved most about her. I drove back to Westfield. Biscuit met me at the door, and I sat on the kitchen floor with him for a while, my back against the cabinet and my good coat still on. The pendant light was on above us. The house was quiet. In the months that followed, the divorce moved through the legal system with the quiet efficiency of a case where one party has documentation and the other has something to hide. Gideon made one attempt at negotiation that his own attorney later withdrew. Dr. Holbrook's binder was thorough. Margot was, in her words, cheerfully relentless. I kept the house. I had wanted the house. I redid the master bathroom tile I'd been holding on to for 2 years, a soaking tub I'd found at an estate sale in Chatham, a vanity light I'd custom ordered from a maker in Vermont. I did most of the demo myself on weekends, which was more satisfying than it had any right to be. My neighbor came over with wine and watched me take a sledgehammer to the old tile surround and called it the most cathartic thing she'd ever witnessed. I don't know what became of Renata and Gideon. I don't follow it. I know that the project partnership between them attracted a different kind of attention than either of them had anticipated, and that the firm underwent some restructuring in the spring. I heard this from a mutual acquaintance and did not ask follow-up questions. What I know is this: 11 years of my life were not a waste. I learned things, I built things. I became someone who noticed details and held her nerve and called her attorney and then walked into a room full of people in a midnight blue dress and did what needed to be done. Biscuit has a new orthopedic bed in the corner of the master bedroom. Right beneath the window I leave cracked, even in winter, because I like the cold air. The reading chair I refinished is beside the lamp I picked up at a market in Hudson last fall. The house looks, finally, exactly like me. And that, it turns out, is more than enough. There's a version of that night I used to replay, the one where I knock instead of push the door open, where I don't see anything, where I go home and eat the chicken piccata myself and fall asleep not knowing. For a long time I thought that version sounded easier. I don't think that anymore. What I know now is that the truth was always there. It had been accumulating for 14 months in 23 quiet transfers in a weekend in the Berkshires that never happened the way I was told it did, in the particular way Gideon stopped asking about the master bathroom renovation. The door opening just meant I finally had to stop explaining it away, and there is something almost merciful about that. The moment when reality stops asking for your permission and just walks in. I used to think that staying calm after something like that was a kind of coldness, a sign you didn't love enough. I understand now that it was the opposite. It was the part of me that had spent years building something, a career, a reputation, a life made from genuine attention and care that simply refused to let grief be the only thing I brought to the situation. Heartbreak is real. But heartbreak alone doesn't protect you. It doesn't open a transaction history. It doesn't call Margot. It doesn't sit across from Dr. Holbrook and read a color-coded binder and understand what it means. Doing the right thing when it costs you something? That's not a quality you're born with. I think it gets made, slowly, out of every small decision to be honest, even when it's inconvenient, to keep your word even when no one's watching, to treat the people around you the way you'd want to be treated when you're the one who needs it. Gideon and Renato weren't unlucky. They made choices consistently over a long period of time, and then those choices had consequences. That's not fate. That's just arithmetic. What I'm most grateful for, and it took me a while to find the word grateful, is that I didn't lose myself in it. I kept working. I kept thinking clearly. I brought documentation to my attorney instead of accusations to my husband. I wore the right dress and walked into that room in Newark and did what needed to be done, and then I walked out into the cold and let it be over. That capacity to hold yourself together when everything inside you wants to fall apart, to stay sharp when staying sharp is the hardest thing. I didn't know I had it until I needed it. The bathroom looks beautiful now. I picked every tile myself. The light in the morning comes through the window I leave cracked, and Biscuit is usually already awake, waiting. The house is quiet in the way that feels chosen rather than empty. I think that's what the other side of something hard can look like if you're willing to stay steady long enough to reach it.